Welcome to the final part of the time travel iceberg. First of all, thanks for the feedback on the previous two parts. I really didn't expect them to reach nearly 3,000 people at the point of recording this, but I'm very grateful they did. Thank you.
If you don't want to miss future projects, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I have some really interesting and intriguing topics I want to do a video on, and I'm sure you will like them if you enjoyed the iceberg so far. Alright, enough yapping around. Lean back for the final part of the time travel iceberg.
Dog years. I'm sure you heard about one dog year being the same as 7 human years. But as it turns out, there's actually more to it. Scientists found out that the first year of a dog's life is roughly the same as 15 human years. The second year is about 9, and after that, each additional year is approximately 4 to 5 human years, depending on the dog's size and breed. Smaller breeds tend to age slower than larger breeds. Historically, the 1 dog year equals X human years method was created to show that dogs age much faster than their humans and give owners a sense of age to take better care of their pets. But they don't actually age faster. They just age faster if we translate or compare their aging to our aging. If dogs could create a concept of time, they would say that we age slow. I think you know where I'm going with this. Animals don't have a concept of time. The dog in this picture has no clue what is going on with this red thing. They don't understand the difference between 10 minutes, 10 hours or 10 years in the same way we do. They don't look at a device and say, "Phew, my deadline is approaching, I gotta hunt that rabbit ASAP," or celebrate the birth of some holy dog that lived 2000 years ago, or wake up at the exact same time so they don't come late to dog work. That's just how we humans do stuff. Not animals. So how do animals perceive time? Well, it's impossible to know how animals perceive the world around them. Scientists found a way to come close with what they call animal clocks. To understand animal clocks, we need to briefly talk about flicker fusion rates. When you look at a light that turns on and off very quickly, like the flickering of a screen or blinking light, your brain processes these flashes in a certain way. If the flickering is slow, you can clearly see the light blinking on and off like a strobe light. But as the flickering becomes faster and faster, your brain starts to merge the flashes together into a single smooth image, and you will stop noticing that the light is flickering at all and perceive it as one steady light. The flicker fusion rate is the speed at which the merging of the flicker happens. You can think of it as the frame rate of a video or a video game, for example. If you ever had large FPS drops while playing games, you know how difficult it can be to react to anything at all when you can't properly react to what you see. And as it turns out, animals have different flicker rates than us. While humans sit at a flicker rate of about 50 to 90 Hz, fruit flies, for example, come in with a flicker rate of about 250 Hz. And this is the exact reason why they seem to be that much faster whenever we try to smack them. Deep-sea fish, on the other hand, which live in near total darkness, have very low fusion rates of about 20 Hz. So a light that flickers for us appears as continuous steady light for them. The flicker fusion rate can be understood as the temporal resolution of an animal and how detailed they can distinguish events in time. And this is of course closely linked to how these animals live. Deep-sea fish don't need to process rapid movement. They prioritize light sensitivity and contrast. For them, it's all about seeing anything at all rather than seeing every small change in motion. Flies and birds, however, need to react fast to dodge predators or catch their prey. Swordfish actually heat their eyes to increase flicker fusion rate for the hunt and therefore increase their chances of being faster than their prey. The Montauk Project. The Montauk Project is a conspiracy theory that's filled with wild claims about all kinds of secret experiments run by the US government. The story goes like this. During the Cold War, the US military allegedly was trying to control the minds of their own people using a massive radar. They experimented with making people teleport and opened portals. They of course also made contact with aliens, and one experiment even created a creature known as the Montauk Beast that supposedly wrecked the whole base before vanishing as mysteriously as it appeared. The whole story was made famous by Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon, who claimed they were part of these experiments but only remembered them years later through hypnosis. Sure. Evidence for these claims is shaky at best, however there is a good reason why so many people tend to believe what happened at Camp Hero. The government actually did something like this.
Which was meant to reduce patients to an infantile psychological state, wherein doctors could take advantage of the person's cognitive vulnerability to attempt to rebuild their mind under the doctor's control.
Declassified documents and various statements show that MKUltra was a real program run by the CIA during the 50s and 60s.
The United States government actually did carry out on our citizens experiments involving radiation.
MKUltra was all about controlling minds and experimenting with human behavior. They gave people acid without telling them and studied how they react. They used hypnosis and electroshock therapy to control people's thoughts and put them in complete isolation for weeks, just to know what would happen. And all of that wasn't just a random experiment, it was a huge government operation that ran over 10 years. So if they did it in the 50s, why wouldn't they repeat it? Unlike MKUltra, which left behind piles of government records and documents, the Montauk Project only has a handful of unverified claims. Most of its evidence comes from people's stories which haven't been confirmed by anyone else. Programs like MKUltra have proven that agencies will sometimes go to horrifying lengths in the name of progress. But the Montauk story takes these fears and cranks them up to an overly extreme level, which is just a bit too much in my opinion. Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was not just a man of his time, he was a mind far ahead of it. So was he a time traveler? Born in 1452, he achieved feats that would take centuries for the world to understand. In an era where most still believed the Earth was the center of the universe, Da Vinci was designing flying machines, sketching detailed human anatomy, painting the most famous piece of art to this day, and coming up with inventions like tanks and robots. His notebooks are filled with inventions and studies that society wouldn't catch up to for hundreds of years. He envisioned possibilities that others couldn't even dream of. Da Vinci is proof that individuals can't break the limits of their society. While collective knowledge grows slowly, some minds break through, achieving things far beyond what seems possible. He wasn't just a genius of his time, he was a preview of the future. While I don't think he was a time traveler, I certainly think that Da Vinci is the closest thing we have of someone being completely detached from their timeline. Dream precognition. What if our dreams could foresee the future? You might have experienced a strange sense of déjà vu when something you dreamed aligned perfectly with reality. But is this truly foresight, or are our minds playing tricks on us? There's one famous example of President Lincoln reportedly dreaming of his own death. Lincoln's friend and law partner Ward Hill Lamar described the dream as Lincoln recounted it to him. Lincoln dreamed of people sobbing, and in his dream he went to investigate. In the East Room of the White House he found a corpse dressed for a funeral. Lincoln asked the figures in the dream what happened. One reported to him that the president was assassinated. In reporting this dream to Lamar, Lincoln appeared disturbed and frightened. Later, however, Lincoln clarified that the president assassinated was not himself, but some other president. This was the dream he had just nights before his assassination. Or another case where in 1966 a landslide of waste from a coal mine slid into the South Wales village of Aberfan. The local school was destroyed by the landslide, killing 144 students and teachers. Psychiatrist John Barker came to the village shortly after the landslide. Barker was researching what happens to people when they believe they are about to die. A notable precognition was submitted by the parents of Errol May, a 10-year-old girl killed in the landslide. The day before the accident, the child had reported to her mother a frightening dream. She had dreamed that her school was no longer there and that it had been covered by something black. There are a lot of cases like these, and researchers followed up on them through various studies, and there are explanations which unfortunately aren't that magical. The first and most common is simply coincidence. I know it sounds boring, but most of the time people who have precognitive dreams may not interpret them as predictive until the corresponding event happens. Factors like confirmation bias, which is basically the tendency to focus on things that confirm our beliefs while ignoring those that don't, can and will contribute to you drawing a connection between what happens in your life and what happens in your dreams. We also know that we dream to process our memories and emotions. As a result, events that you experience during the day may stick with your subconscious. For example, you might dream of purchasing a new phone. When you wake up, you see an advertisement for this very phone you wanted to purchase and render it as a godly precognition. However, if you had been thinking about getting a new phone and researching it for a few days, your dream might simply reflect what was already coming up in your life, and therefore it's not a precognition but just a very accurate assumption. Cultural perceptions of time. This entry is about how time is perceived and valued quite differently across cultures. In Western cultures like the US and most of Europe, time is seen as a limited resource. Punctuality, holding deadlines, and high efficiency are treated as very important attributes that one must hold to be successful in life. In contrast to that, non-Western cultures have a vastly different approach to time. In cultures that practice Hinduism or Buddhism, for example, time is viewed as endless and repetitive. There is less urgency to stick to schedules or manage every minute as efficiently as possible. The roots of cultural time perception lie in historical traditions. There is the concept of linear and cyclical time. Linear time cultures view the future as a straight road leading forward to a better future and are rooted in Christian traditions where time is seen as a linear progression with a beginning and an end. Cyclical cultures, however, are highly influenced by philosophies like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, which view time as tied to natural rhythms like seasons and reincarnation. Predestination Paradox. A predestination paradox, also known as a causal loop, is a theoretical concept in time travel where events in the past and future are connected in a self-reinforcing cycle. In this paradox, a person traveling back in time becomes part of the very events they intended to influence, often causing the initial event that led them to time travel in the first place. This creates a loop where cause and effect are indistinguishable as each depends on the other. I think this paradox is a nice entry point to talk about determinism. The determinist approach says that all behavior has a cause and is therefore predictable. It goes even deeper by stating free will is an illusion and our behavior is governed by internal or external forces over which we have no control. Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking, both important scientists in regard to time travel, identified as determinists. While they both were certain that everything we do is predestined, they added important notions about navigating a world which is predictable. I have noticed that even those who assert that everything is predestined and that we can change nothing about it still look both ways before they cross the street. Stephen Hawking. Despite their beliefs, both of them acknowledge the necessity of acting as free will exists to function in society. So even if you know the game, it's important to play. A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. Schopenhauer. The Specious Present. How long is now? The Specious Present is a concept introduced by E. Robert Kelly and tackles exactly this question. Kelly sees the Specious Present as one of 4 parts of human time perception. The first part is the obvious past, which are events that have already occurred and are recognized as part of history or memory. The second part is the Specious Present, or also called the perceived now. It's a brief span of time that feels like the present moment, but actually includes a small duration of past and a small duration of immediate future events. So it's not a single instantaneous point, but a mix of past and present moments, allowing us to perceive continuity. The real present, which is the third part, describes the theoretical instantaneous moment between the past and the future. The fourth part is the future. This whole idea was further developed by William James, who described the Specious Present as a duration with a bow and stern, constantly changing from not yet to just gone, while maintaining sequence. The idea of the Specious Present is considered a thick, non-zero idea of time, and stands in contrast to the thin, durationless notion of time as used in the mathematical physical landscape. Novikov self-consistency principle. The Novikov self-consistency principle is a theoretical concept in the realm of time travel and states that any actions taken by a time traveler were always part of history, and therefore preventing any paradoxes. According to this principle, events are self-consistent, meaning that even if a time traveler would attempt to change the past, the outcomes will adjust in a way that the timeline remains unchanged. This idea implies that time travel cannot create contradictions such as the grandfather paradox, because any actions taken in the past would have already been accounted for in the present. Rokos Basilisk. The mere thought of what I will tell you in a second might get you tortured. Rokos Basilisk has gained a lot of traction in internet conspiracies over the last years and is considered information hazard because just learning about the idea might theoretically force you to act on it. So what is it about? Rokos Basilisk is a thought experiment about the hypothetical superintelligent AI that would have a rational incentive to punish or torture individuals who knew of it but failed to help bringing it into existence. It's called Rokos Basilisk because the idea was proposed by a user named Roko on a forum called Less Wrong, and basilisk like the mythical creature that could kill with a glance. If you throw time travel into the soup, all of it just gets more scarier. Because even the possibility of time travel by a future AI makes individuals in the present more responsible for the AI's eventual creation, as the basilisk could hold them accountable retroactively for current decisions. Rokos Basilisk has been viewed as a version of Pascal's wager, which proposes that a rational person should live as though God exists regardless of the probability of God's existence, because the finite costs of believing are insignificant compared to the infinite punishment of not believing.
So, do you believe?
Philadelphia experiment. Imagine you take a relaxing good morning walk with your golden retriever at Norfolk, Virginia. You decide to go see the ships at the harbor. You arrive and see a beautiful sunset, and just as you get a complete look on the whole harbor, you lose all your sanity as a huge 100-meter-long aircraft carrier spawns into existence out of nowhere. Huge waves caused by the sudden water displacement crash at the concrete walls. Every attempt to make sense of what you just saw fails. You see an old woman in the distance screaming and running away with all the energy she has left, and a group of young people in panic grabbing their phones out of their big jeans and screaming words you never heard before. Your dog grimaces and hides behind your legs. This huge ship really just appeared out of nowhere. You wake up. It was just one of your crazy conspiracy dreams again. The Philadelphia experiment is a story about a supposed 1943 US Navy experiment conducted at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. According to the legend, the Navy destroyer escort USS Eldridge was rendered invisible and teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, and back. Some versions of the story claim that the experiment also involved not only teleportation but also time travel. The tale suggests disastrous effects on the crew, including disorientation, mental illness, and even being embedded in the ship's structure. Despite its popularity in conspiracy circles, there's no credible evidence to support these claims, and it is widely regarded as a hoax. Rudolph Fentz. According to the story, a man dressed in 19th century clothing was allegedly found confused and disoriented at Times Square, New York in the 50s. He was reportedly hit by a car and killed, and when authorities investigated, they found items in his possession that seemed to originate from the 1800s. The story suggests that he might have been a time traveler, but it is widely believed to be a short story written by Jack Finney in the 50s. Despite its fictional roots, the tale has persisted as a modern myth about time travel. Father Time and Baby New Year. Father Time and Baby New Year are metaphorical representations of time. Father Time is depicted as an elderly man with a long beard, wearing robes and carrying a scythe and an hourglass. He represents the old year. At the end of each year, Father Time is said to pass on his knowledge and responsibilities to Baby New Year. Baby New Year is typically portrayed as a baby or toddler wearing nothing but a diaper, a sash with the New Year's date, and sometimes a top hat. This figure symbolizes rebirth, renewal, and the fresh start that comes with the new year. As the new year progresses, Baby New Year ages until he becomes Father Time himself. This transformation and endless cycle represents progress and learning over time in an easy to understand way. The clock that went backward. The clock that went backward is said to be the earliest known use of a mechanical device used for time travel purposes, even predating Big Boss H.G. Wells. The story was anonymously published in the Sun newspaper in 1881 and was rediscovered about 100 years later by science fiction historian Sam Moskowitz. Moskowitz also found out that the anonymously published story was in fact written by Edward Page Mitchell. Moskowitz conducted great effort to track down and collect all works of Edward Page Mitchell, who he calls to be the single most important but lost giant of science fiction. Because he did not only come first in writing about time travel, he also was first in writing about invisibility, teleportation, a thinking computer, and a cyborg. Gregor Strasser. When asked what one would do if they had a time machine, killing Adolf Hitler is sure to be one of the top answers. But killing Hitler was hard. Historians uncovered a total of 42 plots regarding the assassination of Hitler, and he lived through all of them. And this is where Gregor Strasser comes into play. Gregor Strasser, leader of the Nazi Party before Hitler, had a focus on socialist left principles and had ideological ideas that were much more passive than Hitler's. In 1934, Hitler orchestrated the Night of the Long Knives and purged perceived threats within the party, in which Strasser was executed. So this entry is the arguably wild assumption that, contrary to popular belief, it might be a better and easier to pull off idea to keep Gregor Strasser alive than killing Adolf Hitler. Keanu Reeves' immortality. Let's start this off with a riddle. Which one of these three gentlemen is the real Keanu Reeves? I'm sure you picked this one, but there is a theory that actually all of those are Keanu Reeves. This entry is a myth arguing that Keanu Reeves is immortal. Fans pointed out strikingly accurate resemblances between Keanu Reeves and historical figures such as Charlemagne, a Holy Roman Emperor, or Paul Monet, a 19th century French actor. While his biggest fans state that his kindness and loveliness can only be the source of a 1,000-year-old man, he does seem to age in recent years.
This was level 5, and we will go right to level 6.
Cryogenics. Cryogenics is basically low-temperature physics. It's all about the production and behavior of every kind of material at very low temperatures. So humans too, right? Cryonics or cryopreservation is about just that, low temperature freezing and storage of human remains in the hope that resurrection may be possible in the future. Cryonics is an active field with about 5 companies preserving and storing human bodies right now. The idea of preserving human life was first suggested by Benjamin Franklin and was later popularized by Robert Ettinger. Cryonic supporters argue that as long as brain structure remains intact, there is no fundamental barrier, given our current understanding of physics, to recovering its information content. They hope that some kind of presently non-existent nanotechnology will be able to bring the dead back to life and treat the diseases that killed them. Fred and Linda Chamberlain established the Alcor Life Extension Foundation in 1972, which is now the largest cryonics organization. Cryonics is based on hope. Hope that future scientists will find a way to revive the preserved bodies. It goes without saying that this would be a revolutionary moment in time. However, there is of course skepticism towards the practice. The first and most significant is, ironically, about lifetime. It seems extremely unlikely that any cryonics company could exist long enough to take advantage of the supposed benefits offered. Historically, even the most successful corporations have only a 1 in 1,000 chance of lasting 100 years. And many cryonics companies have indeed failed, and as of now, all but one company founded before 1973 have gone out of business. And their stored corpses have been defrosted. A grim reminder of the dangers of cryonics. The Wreck of the Titan or Futility. The Wreck of the Titan or Futility is a novel written by Morgan Robertson, first published in 1898. The story is known for its eerie similarities to the real-life sinking of the RMS Titanic, which occurred 13 years later in 1912. Both the Titan and Titanic were described as being among the largest ships of the world with similar lengths and both considered unsinkable. Both ships struck an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic. The sinking of both ships resulted in significant death counts, with many passengers unable to be saved due to the lack of lifeboats. The novel's striking similarities to the Titanic catastrophe led some to speculate about Robertson's foresight or precognitive abilities. Robertson's accuracy is thought to be a product of his extensive knowledge of shipbuilding and maritime practices at the time. Following the Titanic disaster, the wreck of the Titan gained renewed attention and was reissued with slight modifications. It remains a fascinating example of how fiction can sometimes mirror reality in a scary way. Simulated reality. If technology doesn't stop evolving, what would stop us from creating a simulated reality in the future? What if this is already what happened? Simulated reality is the theory that our perceived reality might be an artificial simulation. So everything we experience, including time, could be part of a sophisticated simulation created by advanced beings or future humans. In the context of time, simulated reality is about whether our perception of time's flow and its linear nature are programmed into existence rather than being intrinsic properties of the universe. This idea has been popularized in science fiction many times, as seen in the Matrix trilogy, for example. This whole concept is crazy mind candy for me and gets me every time, because wherever you go with it, you just can't possibly disprove it because it undermines everything. I highly recommend Nick Bostrom's book called Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? He's the philosopher who introduced the simulation argument, and really it's strikingly interesting. Language time perception. If you were asked to walk diagonally across a field, would you know what to do? Or what if you were offered $20 today or double that amount in a month? Would you be willing to wait? And how would you line up 10 photos of your loved ones if you were instructed to sort them in chronological order? Would you place them horizontally or vertically? These might seem like simple questions, but remarkably, your answers to these questions are likely to be influenced by the language you speak. English language, for example, uses horizontal spatial metaphors for time. Phrases like looking forward to the weekend and putting the past behind us frame time as a horizontal journey. Mandarin, on the other hand, uses vertical metaphors. Earlier events are up and later events are down, so more like a vertical journey. Economist Keith Jent's work is foundational in this area. He proposed that language with a strongly grammaticalized future tense, for example English or Spanish, encourages speakers to perceive the future as distinct from the present. This psychological separation leads to less future-oriented behaviors such as lower saving rates, reduced retirement wealth, and higher smoking rates. On the other side, languages like German or Mandarin, which do not require explicit future tense marking, tend to save more and are more future-oriented. There are cultures that have quite interesting language-time concepts. In Aymara culture, time is conceptualized with the past in front and the future behind. This is contrary to the typical Western view and reflects a unique perspective where the past, being known and visible, is in front, while the unknown future is unseen and behind. Temporal Ethics. Doing anything time-altering will, without a doubt, kill people. Temporal ethics is about the moral considerations related to actions that impact different points in time, particularly in the context of time travel. One key aspect of temporal ethics is the responsibility we hold towards future generations, especially regarding decisions that have lasting effects, such as everything regarding the well-being of our planet and technological advancements. In the realm of time travel, temporal ethics explores the moral dilemmas associated with altering past events. For example, if one had the ability to prevent a historical tragedy, should they do so? What are the potential consequences of changing established events, and how might such actions affect the present and future? Additionally, temporal ethics considers the preservation of historical integrity. This involves ensuring that our interpretation and records of past events remain accurate and respectful. Temporal ethics encourages us to think beyond immediate outcomes and consider the impact of our decisions, emphasizing a responsibility that spans across time if we ever invent time travel. Speaking about that, the Krasnikov Tube. The Krasnikov Tube is a concept in the realm of general relativity and faster-than-light travel, proposed by physicist Sergei Krasnikov. A Krasnikov Tube would be a permanent space warp created behind a spaceship as it traveled at near light speed to some point and then used the resulting tube for the return trip. As an example, let's think of a starship that travels at near light speed to a star 1,500 light years away. The starship would take only 1.5 years to reach the goal, but in the meantime 1,500 years would pass on Earth because of time dilation. So, as you might have noticed, they need to go back, so another 1,500 years will pass on Earth, right? Nope. Krasnikov Tube. The space warp created while traveling in one direction could be used by the starship for the trip back, and the astronauts would be back on Earth only 3 years after they left, not 3,000. This would be very similar to wormhole travel. In both cases, the distortion of space-time would provide a shortcut that would defy the rules of interstellar travel. The only difference is that the wormhole is a shortcut through space and the Krasnikov Tube is a shortcut through time. There is no instant travel with the Krasnikov Tube, you still need to travel a certain distance. Cat and Dog Evolutionary Paths. Okay, now it gets crazy, but let's try to take this seriously for a second. The idea is that when humanity eventually dies out, it will not be apes that evolve to replace us, but rather cats or dogs because they are the closest to us. Both cats and dogs have been domesticated for at least 10,000 years and are our closest animal companions since then. This whole argument is about that we humans at some point were at the state in which cats and dogs are now and developed to the more or less intelligent species we are. So, what would stop cats and dogs from doing the same? How do clocks work? The distinction between the past, present and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Albert Einstein. Carlo Rovelli, which is perhaps the strongest voice of this argument, states that time is merely a construct of the human mind. In his book he compares time with a rainbow which we think we can see and touch, but once we actually go and look for it, it isn't there. So, if time is an illusion, then how does one craft a device to measure an illusion? The whole discussion takes place at the intersection of philosophy and science and really is about, are we measuring something intrinsic to the universe or are we just trying to organize ourselves? Zeitmauer. Ernst Jünger's Under Zeitmauer is an exploration of humanity's relationship with technology and nature. Zeitmauer is German and translates to time wall. It describes a critical moment in history where technological advancements such as weapons and artificial intelligence will eventually make us question our existence. Crossing this boundary, this time wall, could lead to the end of technology and demand a new understanding of humanity's role. Because if technology fails us, or we fail technology, we have to think at some point, where are we even going with all this progress? What's the point? And this exact moment is where the whole exploration of Ernst Jünger takes place. Jünger adds to the idea that humanity is at a tipping point, facing a choice between continuing on a path dominated by technological progress or finding harmony with Earth. He's all in on the idea that true progress lies not in scientific achievements but in recognizing the cosmic power of the mind. Apocalyptic Mickey. Once a year, I get lost in the ancient civilization rabbit hole and I always wonder what would remain of our current world in 5,000 years. This entry is about the idea that it will not be monuments or written text that persist the test of time, but mass-produced merchandise. In 2022, the Walt Disney Company made over $60 billion just in merchandise sales, and with that almost doubling the second place on the list. Due to the presence all over the globe, these items without context can very well be seen as some kind of religious totems by humans in the far future. So context matters. The whole idea reminded me of the animation short called What on Earth from 1967. It shows Earth from the view of an orbiting Martian spaceship. They look at our planet using cameras and mistake cars as Earthlings and humans as their parasites. They make wild guesses about the lifestyle of cars, how they reproduce, how they eat and how they die. And it somehow feels relatable, because they couldn't possibly see the history on why cars are spread all over the planet. While future civilizations might not be Martians, it's safe to assume that it will be at least challenging to make sense of all the merchandise we produce and buy every single day. Prime Self. The Prime Self is an addition to the idea of multiple selves from other timelines, where only one of you is the true one who initiated the travel, and therefore is the one from which all others originate from. In Rick and Morty, for example, there are thousands of Ricks created through interdimensional time travel and multiverses. But there's only one original Rick called Rick Prime who set all of this in motion. He's the one sociopathic genius from which all other Ricks diverge. So if you ever get access to time travel and find yourself in causal loops, paradoxes, or maybe you just want to enslave one version of yourself to clean your house, make sure to remember your place because your other versions will know your weaknesses. Victor Goddard. Victor Goddard was a British Royal Air Force officer remembered not only for his successful military career, but also for his connection to paranormal phenomena. Among his most compelling stories is his claim of experiencing a time slip. A time slip by definition is basically time travel without any control. So what happened? In 1934, Goddard was tasked with inspecting an abandoned airfield in Dram, Scotland by plane. Upon reaching Dram, he observed that the airfield was in a state of complete disrepair. It was overrun by vegetation and populated by grazing cattle seemingly reclaimed by nature, so really nothing to see here. On his return flight to Andover, England, he found himself in a violent storm with unusual yellow clouds that disoriented him. Struggling to maintain control of his aircraft, he eventually emerged from the storm only to find himself flying over the Dram airfield again. However, this time it appeared entirely transformed. The once abandoned airfield now looked fully operational. He saw 4 aircraft on the ground painted in bright yellow, a color not used by the Royal Air Force, and mechanics dressed in blue overalls, which were also not standard. Most strikingly, he noticed a monoplane model that was completely unfamiliar to him, which for someone like Goddard is just odd. This vision left him stunned. As he flew past the airfield, the storm caught back up to him and he continued to Andover, where he landed safely. Goddard initially kept this experience to himself out of fear. However, 4 years later in 1939, the Royal Air Force issued changes which were matching exactly with his observations. Training planes were painted yellow, mechanics switched to blue uniforms, and a new monoplane called the Magister was introduced. The Dram airfield itself had been completely refurbished and by 1939 is in full operation. The paranormal experiences had a major impact on him. While he spent his later life in education, he still read and lectured about UFOs and pushed Sir George Trevelyan to establish the Wrecking Trust, a foundation focused on spiritual education. Goddard also wrote books about the paranormal, including 1975's Flight Towards Reality, where he made the case for extrasensory perception. Goddard for me is one of the most interesting cases of time travel. Naturally, there are skeptics, but what stands out to me is that the story of Victor Goddard is not born out of modern internet culture, sensationalized photographs, or some amateur science fiction writer trying to launch a career. This guy had everything. He was without a doubt a highly decorated officer in the Royal Air Force with an unflawed reputation. He had really no reason to fabricate these tales. In fact, sharing such stories posed a significant professional and personal risk to him. And yet, here we are, a highly accomplished man, deeply consumed by the paranormal. Drinking primordial soup. Okay, there are 2 parts here, the serious one and the silly one. The serious one first. If we somehow manage to make time travel work so we can travel back and forth in time freely, a time traveler could journey back to the very beginning of Earth's biological history. If you don't know, the primordial soup is the very first step of life. There are many different theories on how it actually happened, but this is what everybody agrees on. So there's the possibility of a time travel human interacting with the primordial soup and either introducing necessary components to spark life, or modifying the existing conditions to change things up. In this case, a paradox arises, which I will blatantly call the ultimate paradox. I know we had a lot of paradoxes and all of them are kinda official, but this one, to me, is the ultimate giga paradox. If a time traveler is responsible for life itself and human history, all of humanity and all we know of becomes a self-contained loop. It's basically the bootstrap paradox of life where no one knows what came first, the soup or the time traveler. It's the chicken or the egg discussion all over again, but in its ultimate form. Okay, this was the serious one, kind of. The silly part is drinking primordial soup. You know, if we ever send time travelers, they will probably be the best we could send. They will be well trained, well experienced, highly decorated astronauts, the best humans we could imagine. But what if, by some chance, this astronaut identifies the primordial soup? He sees before him all human life, all human history in its smallest, most compressed form. And then, there it is, the call of the void. Nothing could have prepared him for this moment. He feels helpless. The urge to end all pain suffocates him, and he crumbles and just sips it away. This was layer 6.
In the next and final layer, I'll represent to you the most eerie and mind-boggling entries I could find. So buckle up and enjoy the depths of the time travel iceberg.
Quantum immortality. Quantum immortality is usually mentioned in the same sentence than quantum suicide. If you feel even slightly anxious towards this topic, you might want to skip to this time mark. The many worlds interpretation, which we discussed at the second layer, introduced us to the idea of quantum events splitting the universe in half every time they occur. This means there are infinite universes where every single event you can imagine plays out. So there is a universe right now where you watch this video with Jerry Seinfeld, who somehow found his way to your apartment and suggested this video to you. Thanks, Jerry. We all know about Schrödinger's famous thought experiment, which introduced us to the idea of the cat which isn't dead or alive until we actually open the box and check. Some scientists push this very idea further by proposing the idea of putting yourself in the same position as Schrödinger's cat, in a box with a gun firing at you once a special radioactive atom decays. If you find yourself alive once the box has opened, then you clearly exist on a timeline in which you survived, and therefore you have achieved quantum immortality by surviving quantum suicide. The thought experiment was pushed even further and got applied to real-world events. It argues that, for example, near-death experiences or avoided accidents might be instances where your consciousness somehow shifts in a timeline where you survive. So in principle, there is a world where you live indefinitely because every time you die, you just shift into a world where you don't, and with that rendering you immortal. Safe states. Safe states is a small spin on the idea of quantum immortality that I wanted to include. It's about, instead of sending your consciousness to another timeline where you lived, it sends your mind back in time and subconsciously makes you choose a different path. What would mean that there are some kind of safe states where your mind is sent to. Both the quantum immortality and the safe state entry are playing in a reality where the many worlds interpretation is real and can be used to our advantage. So just speculation mind candy stuff as of now. Ending reality. If you have watched the whole time travel iceberg to this point, you know there are a lot of paradoxes happening in time travel. So what even is possible and what is not, and is there a point where the universe just says, hold up, we're done here? The idea of ending reality speculates that there could be a threshold for how many paradoxes or inconsistencies the universe can take before ultimately collapsing, which is of course followed up by the question, how many is too many, and can the universe take any paradoxes at all? The whole concept ties perfectly into Novikov's self-consistency principle, which we talked about earlier. If this principle fails, it might imply that reality has no built-in safeguards against contradictions, and once we do anything crazy, the universe just says no. There is a great YouTube video I have watched while preparing the iceberg, and I highly recommend it. It's packed with great ideas and concepts like ending reality, for example, and it really inspired me to dive that deep into the time travel rabbit hole. So feel free to check it out. Safety not guaranteed. Wanted. Someone to go back in time with me. This is not a joke. You'll get paid after we get back. Must bring your own weapons. Safety not guaranteed. I have only done this once before. This news ad was released in a local newspaper in 1997 and started one of the most famous early internet myths, when the user Axel Bonbach made this YTMND page in 2005 and put the infamous Mullet Man alongside the article and, in a heroic act, added the song Push It to the Limit. In the following year, the user Scrow posted a picture he allegedly found in his attic. The picture seems to show the same mullet man and sparked even more curiosity around the mysterious article. A more ugly investigation attempt was about finding the supposed owner of the P.O. box mentioned and resulted in an old couple in South California being spam called by the whole internet, asking them what weapon they should bring and so on. The manhunt and the mystery took an end when John Silvera came forth with the confession that he wrote this ad in 1997 as a filler because real ads came up short. He was usually asked to come up with jokes or riddles, and one day, to be creative, he came up with 2 ads. One was him looking for a girlfriend, and the other one was the time travel ad. So no time traveler, but still a nice story about how time travel can catch the attention of people all over the world. Frozen time. Frozen time is the idea that should reality collapse or encounter some catastrophic event, time itself could simply stop. In this case, everything, our thoughts, clocks, planets, would freeze. The universe would essentially hit a pause button, leaving us with no clue. Time is defined by stuff doing stuff, by movement and interactions. There would be absolutely no way for us to realize it. Time could have stopped a million times for a million of years since I started the sentence, and there would be no way of knowing. This is somehow similar to the last Tuesday problem. The last Tuesday problem says that we have no way of knowing whether the universe was created last Tuesday with all our memories and history just fabricated into existence. All of this is just a level too high. By design, we can't possibly zoom out enough to check if any of this is even possible. It just highlights how deeply our reality relies on the things we can observe, which we hope is everything there is. Time jumps. Have you ever experienced a moment where you just drifted off? You stared at an object or place and completely lost your sense of time. You just stood there. Nothing happened. And then suddenly, you caught yourself and moved on with life. Time jumps are characterized by gaps in personal awareness, where individuals suddenly find themselves at a later point in time without any memory of what happened in between. While the most obvious example of a time jump might be sleep, let's set that aside for now and focus on the more unexpected and sudden time jumps that occur while being awake. A few years ago, I took a job 70 kilometers from home and drove there daily for about 2 years. Driving the same route nearly 200 days a year put me into an autopilot state. I often found myself unable to recall specific parts of the drive. I would question whether I had already crossed a particular intersection, or on one occasion I simply appeared at work without any conscious memory of the journey. I knew I had entered the car and driven there, but I lacked any recollection of the drive, and it was kinda scary. While researching time jumps, I discovered that there is a name for this phenomenon. It's called highway hypnosis. Scientists define it as a state where the brain processes information on a subconscious level while conserving cognitive resources. This usually results in partial or complete amnesia for the time spent driving. Essentially, your brain is still functioning, monitoring the road, responding to others, and so on, but your conscious mind disengages due to the monotony of the task. The primary trigger for the highway hypnosis is thought to be a lack of sensory stimulation. This aligns with findings from studies where participants are deprived of any external sensory input, for example sight, sound, touch, and so on. In these experiments, individuals experienced a break in their perception of time. So without sensory input to anchor their experience, time seemed to stop altogether. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we have to work to feel time. When we stop feeding our brains with action or stimulation, time will feel like it speeds up or skips entirely. Backwards time. Backwards time differs from conventional time travel theories where characters jump to different points in time, as seen in Back to the Future, for example. Instead, backwards time revolves around experiencing events in reverse order by inverting the flow of entropy for specific objects or individuals. This concept, also known as time inversion, was popularized by Christopher Nolan's movie Tenet. With time inversion applied to your body, numerous phenomena appear unnatural to us. For example, when surrounded by flames, you would not burn to death but freeze to death because the flames would draw heat from your body instead of transferring heat to it. Breathing becomes reversed too. Oxygen flows out of your lungs rather than into them. This is why characters in Tenet wear face masks when experiencing the world in reverse. As Christopher Nolan explains in his production notes, every law of physics is symmetrical. It can run forwards or backwards in time and remain consistent, except for entropy. Entropy has only one direction. It either increases or remains constant. So what we perceive as time might actually be our perception of entropy at work. In Tenet, when we see entropy decreasing, like for example when John David Washington catched a bullet, we interpret it as events moving backwards in time. The movie script was guided by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Kip Thorne. However, no claim was made that the movie's concept of time inversion is in any way scientifically accurate. Instead, it serves as a creative exploration of theoretical physics and is perhaps the most innovative take on time travel in recent years. The Lamp Nightmare. The Lamp Nightmare is a classic Reddit story written by an anonymous Reddit user. The story starts off with the protagonist being knocked out by a 300-pound football player. While unconscious on the ground, the Reddit user lived through an entirely different life. He met a wonderful woman, they got married and had 2 beautiful kids. Life was pretty good for him. But one day, while sitting on his couch, he noticed something suspicious about the lamp. He described it as kinda inverted. It just looked wrong. And from there on, he was drawn into it. He couldn't look away from the lamp for 3 whole days. He stopped eating, he stopped using the bathroom. There was nothing but the lamp. His wife had someone come and try to talk to him, but hope was long gone. She took the kids to her mother's house, and right after that he realized it all. The lamp is not real. The house is not real. The kids, his wife, the last 10 years of his life are not real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper and took up his entire perspective, and then suddenly he heard voices, screams, weird sounds. To odd extent, he was almost tortured with unbearable pain when he finally opened his eyes and found himself on the sidewalk where he was knocked out. The story was finished with him saying that he experienced 3 years of depression and grief over his non-existent family. He rendered himself scared of going insane and sometimes cried himself to sleep, hoping he would see his wife and children in his dreams. While researching this, I found similar stories related to near-death experiences where individuals in life-threatening situations experienced vivid sensations like floating outside their body or complete life reviews in split seconds. Research regarding near-death experiences state that such experiences come from spikes in brain activity during moments of extreme stress. However, it could also be describing a dissociative state. Individuals in this state experience complete detachment from reality in a constructed alternate life in response to extreme stress and trauma. I am certainly not qualified to state that any of this matches what happened here, but I think it's a nice entry point to talk about how our perception of time can crumble under extreme stress or trauma, which is interesting, but also terrifying. Die Glocke. The Nazis are known for their megastructures. They planned an Atlantic Wall, a world capital city, and a megatrain. All of these are far away from what we consider possible, and surely they didn't shy back from trying to build a time machine, right? Let me tell you about Die Glocke. The story of Die Glocke was first introduced by Polish journalist Igor Witkowski, who claimed to have discovered information about the device through interrogation transcripts from Nazi officer Jakob Sporrenberg. Die Glocke is described as a bell-shaped device made out of heavy metal. It contains 2 counter-rotating cylinders filled with a mysterious substance known as Xerum-525, which was supposedly highly radioactive and frequently caused dizziness and sleep deprivation to people working with it. So what is this weird device supposed to do? You guessed it right, time travel. While no credible evidence support these claims, the 2 main sources describe the device as either a UFO or time machine. Some theories even claim that Die Glocke was actually seen flying in some UFO sightings. All information about Die Glocke is honestly just messy, and I will not go an inch further down this rabbit hole. However, this device is more than worth mentioning because, in my opinion, it fits well into the megalomania of the Nazis and shows what human nature desires when there are no boundaries. Child time experiment. Okay, I know it's the last layer and we had some crazy MK Ultra stuff before, but this entry is not as dire as it sounds. Child Time Experiments is about Jean Piaget's research on children's perception of time, and it's perhaps the most important study when it comes to understanding how we learn time. Piaget describes the development in 4 stages. The first stage is the sensory-motor stage. In this stage, time perception is limited to the present moment, as infants completely lack the ability to think of anything beyond. The second stage is called the pre-operational stage. In this stage, kids start to develop symbolic thought. However, their time perception is almost entirely influenced by non-temporal factors such as effort or intensity. For example, if you show kids an angry, fearful face, they experience it as lasting longer than a neutral or happy face, because it is more emotionally intense to them. This is also the stage where children learn to hate losing, which is a deeply rooted cognitive bias called loss aversion. The next stage ranges from 7 to 11 years and describes the point where children start to think logically. They begin to understand time as a continuous flow and start to be comfortable with using words like earlier or later and describe events in temporal order. The last stage goes from 12 years and up and describes the ending state in which they gain the ability to think abstractly about time and can engage in complex reasoning such as cause and effect and timelines or schedules. While Piaget's work focuses on educational practices, I think there is an important implication, which is that our time perception is more nurture than nature. 20 years from Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck, also called the Iron Chancellor, was a Prussian statesman who played a pivotal role in unifying Germany into a powerful, stable empire in 1871. His forced resignation in 1819 by Kaiser Wilhelm II marked the beginning of what Bismarck saw as the end of order. In December 1897, during one of his final speeches, he reportedly issued 2 key warnings to the world and Germany especially. First, Germany's crash will come 20 years of my departure if things go on like this. And second, one day the great European war will come out of some damn foolish thing in the Balkans. Sure enough, 20 years after his death, the First World War happens, triggered by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the Balkans. While Bismarck's predictions are perfect material for speculations and conspiracies about time travel, I'm sure they came from a deep understanding of politics and tensions inside Europe and are a testament of his character. Tachyonic Antitelephone. How heavy is this cow? Think of a number, take your time. The correct answer is 500 kilograms. While I cannot know what number you had in mind, I am certain that it wasn't this number, or this one, or this one. Because mass can't be negative, right? The tachyonic antitelephone plays with that thought and challenges it. But to better understand the antitelephone, let's talk about tachyons first. Unlike normal particles, which have mass and require infinite energy to reach the speed of light, tachyons behave in the exact opposite way. They have an imaginary mass, which is basically negative mass, and would require infinite energy to slow down to the speed of light. As a result, their baseline velocity is always faster than light. In some reference frames, tachyons appear to move backward in time, which inspired Gregory Benford to introduce the world to the tachyonic antitelephone, a device to send messages into the past using tachyons. So where are the tachyons and how can I call my younger self so he buys bitcoins? It ain't that easy. The tachyonic antitelephone and the tachyons remain in the realm of theoretical physics due to, let's say, some unresolved issues such as paradoxes, missing experimental evidence, causality, and basically all of physics working in every imaginable way against the existence of such particles. Demomans sticky bomb. YouTuber Shaunik discovered that Demomans sticky bomb, which is usually triggered by right-clicking and doesn't explode otherwise, actually would explode if we waited for 10 octillion, 790 septillion, 282 sextillion, 427 quintillion, 655 quadrillion years, which is amidst the projected death of the universe. While keeping a computer working for such a long time comes with a whole lot of different challenges, I think the sticky bomb, yet alone a line of code outlasting stars and galaxies, is kinda ironic and poetic. While Shaunik's discovery may be rooted in just a programmer quirk, I consider the thought of a lonely sticky bomb patiently waiting to explode as perfectly capturing both our ingenuity and insignificance. It's a neat reflection on humanity's relationship with time and existence. Whether intentional or not, the sticky bomb for me has become an unlikely metaphor for human nature. Creative, fleeting, and endlessly curious about our place. And time travel is exactly that. It captures perfectly our infinite desire to the one thing we can't possibly get enough of.